You know, when we were getting ready for this deep dive, I gotta be honest, the name David Leonard Wood, it didn't ring a bell for me.
Yeah.
But this guy, he's got this nickname, the Desert Killer. And his story, well, let me tell you, it's messed up, but also kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I know, right?
He's on death row in Texas, scheduled to be executed March 2025. So the
Right.
clock is definitely ticking, which I think makes this whole deep dive even more, I don't know, relevant or something.
For sure.
We're going off his Wikipedia article, and man, what a story.
It's a wild one.
So, like, just to get us started, what's the deal with this guy? What makes his story so different or interesting?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that his background, it's not what you typically expect, when you think about a serial
Wow.
killer.
Okay, so not your stereotypical, like, messed up childhood horror movie stuff.
Kind of.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Paint me a picture here. What was his childhood like?
Well, so he was born in Texas, but then his family moved to what seemed like a pretty nice, well-off neighborhood in El Paso. Gotcha. His dad was an executive at the electric company. They had this, nice house, all the outward signs of like success and everything.
Okay, I see where you're going with this picture-perfect family, right?
But
Some dark secrets hiding underneath.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's already giving me chills. All right, lay it on me. What are the details?
So his mother, she had some really serious mental health issues. She was even receiving, what's it called? Electroconvulsive therapy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
ECT, yeah.
No kidding. That's some heavy stuff. I can't even imagine what that would be like to experience as a kid.
Yeah, I know, right? It must have had a huge impact on him.
Huge. So what about his dad? Was he, like, around, involved at all?
No, not really. Wood and his siblings were constantly being shuffled around between relatives and foster homes.
Wow. So no stability at all, just
Wow.
constant upheaval.
Yeah, imagine that, never really feeling like you belong or have a place to call home.
Man, that's got to be rough. Just, I don't know, adds another layer to this whole thing.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like we're talking serious childhood trauma here. Did that, like, start to show itself early on? Did it manifest in any way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, he was a huge troublemaker at school, always getting into trouble, and eventually he got expelled.
Oh.
Then he tried to join the army.
Interesting. So maybe looking for some structure, some kind of escape,
Yeah, I think that's a good possibility. Maybe he was searching for something.
but it didn't work out.
Well, they rejected him.
What do you think? Would his life have been totally different if he had gotten in?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what if that had been his turning point, you know?
That chance to, I don't know, turn things around.
Yeah.
Instead, he was convicted of indecency with a child at just 17.
17, yeah.
Wow, that's so young.
I know.
How long was he in for that?
He got a 5-year sentence, but he only ended up serving 2. And get this, just 8 days after he's released, he commits 2 rapes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, 19-year-old and a 13-year-old.
That's just terrifying. Clearly, this guy is, like, escalating. So he goes back to prison, right?
Yep, back to prison he goes.
But this is where it gets kind of weird for me, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So he's in prison for these horrific crimes, but he's considered a model inmate.
That's what they called him.
He was even participating in those, like, rehab programs.
Yeah, apparently.
Hold on, a model inmate after raping 2 young girls. I don't get, how does that even make sense?
It really is baffling, isn't it?
It really is. It makes me wonder if he was, like, manipulating the system,
Oh, yeah.
playing the part to try to get out early.
Definitely a possibility.
And guess what?
What?
That's exactly what happened.
The war.
He was granted parole in 1987
Unbelievable.
after only serving 6 years of a 20-year sentence.
6 years. You're kidding.
I'm not 6 years.
I mean, that's... Wow.
Seriously, the justice system really dropped the ball on that one.
Yeah, no kidding.
It makes you think, right?
Yeah.
About how these parole decisions are made, the whole system.
Absolutely raises so many questions.
So he gets out, he's back in El Paso, and he's working at a furniture store, even joins a motorcycle club, trying to blend back in.
Trying to fit in.
Yeah, like a normal guy, but
Right.
underneath it all, he's a violent predator.
Yeah. It's seriously disturbing.
It's really scary to think about blending right back into society like nothing ever happened.
I know, right? And from what I read, he was apparently very charming, too.
Charming, like how charming are we talking? Like, was he, I don't know, like a Ted Bundy type?
Yeah.
Using his looks to lure victims?
It's a good question. I don't know if this article really goes into that level of detail about his methods.
Okay.
But we do know that during this, like, seemingly normal period in his life, El Paso was suddenly plagued by this string of disappearances.
Oh,
Young women just vanishing.
this is between when he was released and when those bodies were discovered, right?
Yeah, between February and August of 1987, 9 young women disappeared.
9.
9 women in just 6 months. That's a terrifying pattern, and it really left the community on edge.
Absolutely. Tell me about some of the victims. Were there any, like, common threads, any similarities?
Well, there were definitely some chilling similarities. There was Marjorie Knox. She was just 14 years old. She vanished after attending a Valentine's Day party.
Oh, man, just a kid.
Yeah, and then there's Melissa Alaniz. She was only 13, and her parents actually knew the Knox family through work.
Oh, wow, that's awful. That's just heartbreaking.
It really is.
What about the others?
We don't know a ton about all of them, but there's another case that stands out. Desiree Wheatley, 15 years old, last seen with a tattooed man at a convenience store.
Okay, a tattooed man. Now I'm starting to get suspicious.
Right.
But are we even sure these disappearances are connected to Wood at this point? Like, definitively?
That's a good question. The connection wasn't immediately obvious. It wasn't like, oh, this is definitely him. But everything changed in September of '87 with a gruesome discovery out in the desert.
All right, okay, this is it. Lay it on me. What happened?
So some utility workers, they stumbled upon the skeletal remains of Rosa Maria Casio.
Oh, God.
Yeah, she was buried in a shallow grave out in the desert. And just 100 meters away, they found another body, Karen Baker.
100 meters? That's way too close to be a coincidence.
Exactly. It was a huge red flag for investigators. Like, this is not random. There's a pattern here.
Definitely.
They determined that Casio was likely strangled. Her jaw was broken in 2 places. But with Baker, her remains were too decomposed to determine a cause of death.
Okay, so we've got 2 bodies found close together in the desert, both young women, and this is all happening while Wood's back in El Paso.
Right.
This is starting to feel very connected to those disappearances.
Yeah, it was all starting to come together. And then a really brave witness came forward, and she blew the whole case wide open.
Wow. Okay, who was she, and what did she know?
Her name was Judith Kelling Brown.
Okay.
She was a prostitute, and she claimed that she had been kidnapped and raped by a man who matched Wood's description.
Hold on, she survived an encounter with this guy.
She did, yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, what did she say happened?
She was lured into a truck, driven out to the desert. She even saw a rope, like, dangling from his pocket.
Oh my God, that's chilling.
Right. It's seriously scary stuff. He tried to rape her not once, but twice. But both times they were interrupted by people passing by.
Oh, okay, so she managed to escape.
Yeah, she managed to get away. She went straight to the police.
Thank God.
I know, right? And thankfully, they took her seriously.
Good.
Her description of the place where she was taken, it matched the area where Casio and Baker's bodies were found.
So all of a sudden, all eyes are on David Wood.
Yep, he's front and center now.
It's like all the pieces of the puzzle were finally clicking into place.
Right.
But they still needed more to connect him definitively, right? Like beyond a reasonable doubt.
Oh, they found it. Don't worry. It's pretty damning.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What did they find?
So remember how Wood's roommate mentioned that Wood had cleaned his truck really thoroughly with a vacuum cleaner shortly before his arrest?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, they examined that vacuum cleaner bag.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they found orange and yellow acrylic fibers.
Okay.
And guess what? Those fibers matched ones found on the victim's clothing.
No way.
Yeah, they finally had concrete physical evidence that linked him to the crimes.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really is.
So what about those other missing women? Did any of them ever turn up?
No, sadly no.
Oh, man.
Wood was charged with 6 murders, but the bodies of 3 missing girls were never found.
That's awful. Their families never got any closure.
It's just devastating.
So they had the fiber evidence, but was there anything else tying him to the crimes? Like, anything else?
You are not going to believe this. While he was in jail, other inmates claimed that Wood actually bragged about the murders.
He bragged. Are you serious?
Yeah, apparently he described like how he lured his victims, his methods, even the burial site.
Oh my God, the arrogance is just mind-blowing.
I know, right? It's crazy.
So with all this evidence against him, what happened next? Did he finally, like, confess?
No, not a chance.
He?
He maintained his innocence through the whole thing.
Wow, I can't believe this guy.
I know, it's wild.
But with all that evidence, the trial was inevitable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
That's right.
I can't wait to hear what happened next. This case is already, like, giving me chills.
That's definitely a wild one.
Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back with part 2 after a quick break.
Can't wait.
All right, so we left off with a mountain of evidence pointing right at David Wood. Fibers, witness testimony, even his own jailhouse bragging. But this guy's still adamant that he's innocent. How does that play out in court?
Well, his lawyers, they tried everything to delay that trial, arguing that, all the media attention and the public outrage in El Paso, it would make it impossible to get a fair trial.
Okay, so they're basically saying, like, everyone already thinks he's guilty.
Yeah, pretty much.
Isn't that, I don't know, admitting defeat before they even start?
It's a common strategy, especially in these high-profile cases, Create doubt, play the victim card, and sometimes it actually works.
And in this case...
Well, they actually managed to get the trial moved.
Really?
Yep, they moved to Dallas.
Wow, so they really did get a change of scenery, but that doesn't magically make the evidence disappear, right?
No, of course not.
Right.
But despite all the delays and the legal maneuvering, in 1992, David Leonard Wood was convicted on 6 counts of murder.
6 counts, that's huge.
It is.
So justice served, case closed, end of story, right?
Well, not quite. What? There's more. Oh, yeah, there's more.
Of course there is. This is David Wood we're talking about.
Exactly. And remember, this is Texas, so...
Oh, right, the death penalty.
He was sentenced to death, and that's where things get really complicated.
Okay, I'm with you. How complicated are we talking?
Well, Wood's case, it's been going through the appeals courts for decades.
Wait, decades? He was convicted in 92, and it's what, 2024 now?
Yeah.
What's the holdup?
Capital punishment cases in the U.S., it's a long and winding road.
Okay.
It's full of legal challenges and ethical debates, and it takes forever.
Gotcha.
One of the main arguments Wood's lawyers have been using is that he's mentally disabled, and executing him would be cruel and unusual punishment.
Okay, so they're saying he's not, like, mentally fit to face the death penalty.
Right.
Does that argument, does it hold up in court?
Sometimes it can, but it's a tough argument to make.
Sure.
They've presented evidence of his IQ scores, some of which are low enough to meet the criteria for intellectual disability.
But the courts weren't convinced.
Nope, they ultimately rejected that argument.
So even with low IQ scores, they're saying he's still eligible for execution.
Well, the problem is those IQ tests, the ones they used back then, they weren't as reliable as the ones we have today. And proving intellectual disability just based on those old scores, it's nearly impossible.
That makes sense.
But there's another twist to this whole story.
Okay, hit me with it.
DNA evidence.
Oh, wow. Now we're talking. This is where things get really interesting. What kind of DNA evidence?
Wood's lawyers, they're putting all their hopes on new DNA testing technology.
Okay.
They believe that it could actually exonerate him after all these years.
Seriously. Exonerate him. But if he's really guilty, why would he even want DNA testing? Wouldn't that just confirm it?
Well, that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's a huge gamble.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
If the DNA matches him, that's it. Game over.
Wow.
But if it doesn't, it throws the whole case into question.
That's a lot of pressure.
Definitely.
So what's happening with the DNA testing? Have they done it yet?
That's the thing. It's still pending.
So that's why his execution date keeps getting pushed back.
Exactly. It's like a legal chess match.
They're both waiting for the right moment to make their move.
Yeah, exactly.
So while we wait for all this DNA drama to unfold, let's talk about David Wood himself. We've talked about his crimes, his legal battles, but what about the psychology of a guy like this? What makes a serial killer tick?
Yeah, that's a crucial part of this whole thing, right? Trying to understand the why behind these horrific acts.
Absolutely.
We do have some insight from Dr. Thomas Allen.
Okay.
He's a forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Wood.
Gotcha.
And he diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, antisocial personality disorder. Break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Essentially, it means a person has this long-term pattern of manipulating, exploiting, or violating the rights of others. And they do it without any remorse. They often lack empathy, and they disregard social norms completely.
So basically not the kind of guy you want to be stuck in an elevator with.
No, definitely not.
Okay, but how does this diagnosis, how does it apply to Wood specifically?
Well, Dr. Allen, he described Wood as manipulative, arrogant, and narcissistic.
Sounds about right.
He's highly intelligent, but he just doesn't have any empathy.
Okay.
And he has zero regard for the consequences of his actions.
So charming on the surface, but underneath it all, he's a cold, calculating predator.
Pretty much.
And that charm, I bet that played a big part in how he was able to lure his victim.
Absolutely. He could blend in, could gain people's trust, and then just exploit that trust for his own twisted purposes.
It's a scary thought.
It really is.
So Dr. Allen's assessment, it helps us understand the why, but it doesn't excuse his actions, obviously.
Of course not.
Right.
Understanding the psychology of a criminal is important for prevention and treatment, but it doesn't make their crimes any less horrific, you know?
Absolutely.
It doesn't change the impact on the victims.
You know, it's interesting. This case has been featured on a bunch of those true crime shows.
Yeah, like what?
Mark of a Killer, On the Case with Paula Zahn.
Oh, yeah, those are popular ones.
It's crazy how much people are fascinated by true crime.
That's true.
But I think it's more than just, like, morbid curiosity, you know?
Yeah, they feel it.
These shows, they can actually be educational in a way.
For sure.
They shed light on how investigations work, the legal system, the impact of these crimes on real people.
Absolutely. They can spark important conversations about justice, ethics, even just the dark side of human nature.
Right.
And in a case like Wood's, where it's not over yet, these shows can raise awareness. And who knows, maybe even influence the outcome.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
It's definitely possible.
All right, so we've covered a lot, the crimes, the trial, the psychology, the DNA, the whole 9 yards, but the clock is still ticking.
It is.
Wood's execution date is getting closer. What happens next?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I guess so.
With those DNA tests still pending, it's really anyone's guess.
Right.
Will they exonerate him?
Or will they seal his fate?
We'll have to wait and see.
This is one heck of a cliffhanger.
It is.
Stay tuned, listeners, because this story is far from over. We've really gone deep on this one, huh?
Yeah, we have.
David Leonard Wood, the desert killer.
Mm-hmm.
His story has been, well, it's been a lot.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
But I think as we start wrapping things up, it's important to kind of zoom out a little, look at the bigger picture.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Wood's case, it's not just some like crazy true crime story. It really makes you think about some bigger issues.
Oh, for sure. It highlights some really important stuff going on in our society, things we need to talk about.
Yeah, we talked about the justice system and how it seemed to fail in this case. Like, how was this guy even paroled early after those rape convictions?
Right, and then there's the whole debate about capital punishment. That always comes up in these cases.
It does, but it also makes you think about those vulnerabilities that exist in any community, you know? The fact that these young women, some just teenagers, could just disappear, and it took so long for anyone to really notice.
It's a scary thought, for sure.
It really is. Like, where was the outcry? Where was the sense of urgency to find these women?
It's a good question, and it makes you wonder if things would have been different if these victims, you know, if they came from different backgrounds, more affluent families or something.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like those biases we all have, maybe without even realizing it, they can have real consequences.
Exactly.
It's a harsh reminder that justice, well, it's not always as blind as we like to believe.
It's not, and then there's the whole question of rehabilitation, right? Wood, he was supposedly a model inmate during those earlier prison stints. He did those sex offender programs. But obviously something went wrong.
It really makes you question that whole idea of rehabilitation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Like, are some people just wired differently? Can some people just not change no matter what we do?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's this constant back and forth trying to find that balance between protecting society and giving people a chance to redeem themselves. And in Wood's case, it feels like the system failed on both ends.
It's just a tragic outcome all around. So what can we learn from all this? What needs to change so something like this doesn't happen again?
Big questions, right? But I think we got to keep pushing for reform in the justice system, better ways to assess risk, more effective treatment programs.
Yeah, for sure.
And honestly, we need to have some tough conversations as a society about how we view and address violence against women, especially against women from marginalized communities.
Couldn't agree more. We can't just ignore these issues and pretend they'll go away.
Exactly. We got to face them head on.
Okay, so as we wrap up this whole deep dive, there's still that one big question mark hanging over everything.
What's that?
The DNA evidence.
Oh, right. The wild card that could change everything.
What are your thoughts on it? Do you think there's a real chance this DNA testing could actually prove he's innocent?
It's possible. I mean, we've seen it happen before.
We have.
DNA evidence has overturned convictions even after decades.
Crazy, right?
It is. But it's also possible that it confirms his guilt, puts an end to all the appeals and legal back and forths.
It's a waiting game now.
Yeah, and the clock is ticking.
It's wild to think about, right? Just a little bit of genetic material, and it could change this guy's entire life.
When
And it could bring some closure to the families of the victims, or maybe even more questions.
it's hard to say.
I guess this whole case just shows how much we rely on science and technology in our pursuit of justice,
It does.
but also how imperfect that pursuit can be.
It's a good point. It's a reminder that the search for truth and justice, it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
It never really ends. It keeps evolving as we learn more, develop new technology, and sometimes, even with all the evidence in the world, we're still left with more questions than answers.
That's the truth. Well, listeners, that's the story of David Leonard Wood, the Desert Killer. It's a pretty disturbing story, a story of violence, deception, and just how complicated the criminal justice system can be.
We really encourage you to dig deeper into this case, explore the sources we talked about, maybe even check out some of those true crime documentaries.
Yeah, do some research. But most importantly, remember, the victims in this case, their lives were cut way too short, and their stories deserve to be heard.
Absolutely, their stories matter.
And as always, keep those critical thinking skills sharp. The world of true crime is full of twists and turns, and it's up to each of us to figure things out, weigh the evidence, and come to our own conclusions.
That's right, question everything.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See ya.